Okay, hey you guys. So this is a different sort of Taco Tuesday than I have ever done before because wow, things have been a little strange lately in my recording schedule. I haven't been with Gomez in a long time now, so regular Taco Tuesday isn't coming out because of that. And also, what was supposed to take over, which I've said a few times, is like a special interest sort of thing that Malice and I are doing. And it was going to start with a wrestling episode. And it ended up getting rescheduled like 4 or 5 times at this point. And it's been a bit of a struggle to figure out what to replace it with. So since I couldn't get that this week and I couldn't do regular Taco Tuesday this week, I decided to do a different episode of the special interest podcast, which I didn't want the first episode to be just me, but the way recording has worked out, it is just me. Hi. Although I will have a chat log with Malice out this week. Gosh, I really hope, at least. My God. Who knows? We'll everyone cross your fingers. It'll be fine. I'm sure it'll be fine. But, so today it's just me. And this was a planned episode of the special interest off-topic run. And again, like I said, I didn't want to start with it, but I don't really have a choice at this point, so I'm just doing it now. So what it is, I'm sure I've put something spooky in the thumbnail. I don't know what I'm calling this yet, but I'm going to tell you guys some ghost stories. So if you're not interested in ghost stories, I totally understand. This episode isn't for you. Some episodes are not going to be for everyone. I personally don't know anything about wrestling. It's never been an interest of mine. But I like hearing what other people are interested in. So we're going to have a lot of episodes that won't appeal to everyone, obviously. And so if ghost stories aren't your thing, it won't bother me. So that's fine. But I'm going to tell you some ghost stories. And when I say tell you some ghost stories, I don't mean I'm going to read you ghost stories I found on the internet. I'm going to tell you my ghost stories. Because a weird thing about me is that I have a lot of ghost stories. I probably don't seem, I don't know, maybe I do. I feel like I don't seem the type to have a lot of ghost stories, but it is one of my main interests. I love ghost stories, and I have also seen a lot of ghosts, let's say. And I don't know if my interest in ghost stories started because I had seen so many ghosts, because it started pretty young for me. So I don't know if that's where it started, or if, I don't know, if I really enjoyed ghost stories and started seeking out spooky places to be and therefore had more. I don't know. So, either way, I'm going to do a little bit of a disclaimer here at the beginning. If you don't believe in ghosts, then how about we just agree right now that all of these stories are fake? You're right. You're very smart. Look at you. I'm so proud of you for knowing it's all fake. Wow, that's really good job, bud. So proud. So don't come into the comments and say a bunch of dumb bullshit. Like, oh, I'm pretty sure what you actually saw was this. Or, I think you're making that up. Everything I'm about to tell you did happen to me. It is true. And no, I'm not schizophrenic. I don't have a mental illness that causes me to hallucinate. Yes, I have been to many psychiatric doctors in my life. I don't have hallucinations. I just have seen a lot of ghosts. Some people end up seeing a lot of ghosts. I don't know why. My family in general has kind of a weird amount of ghost stories in it. Maybe it's a genetic thing. Who fucking knows? Anyways, the thing is that if you don't believe in ghosts but you still want to listen to this, I need you to suspend your disbelief. because I don't want to tell my stories and have people come up with, like, bend themselves over backwards to tell me what I experienced, even though you weren't there and I was. And I find that very annoying because, trust me, I have told these stories to a lot of people over the years. Whatever your genius theory, which I'm going to guess probably for most of it is, I don't know, wind or temporary insanity, something like that. I've heard all of it already. And I'm so proud of you for being so skeptical. Wow, look at your look at you. So many points for you. So proud. Don't come to me in my comments and do that. Either you can have a fun, spooky time listening to my ghost stories and, like, act right, or you can fuck off. That's my opinion. I just want to tell you some cool ghost stories that have happened to me. Have a spooky little time, especially because it's storming outside right now. It is unusually dark and the thunder is rolling in. So for me, it's very atmospheric. So how about we just tell some spooky stories and we enjoy it. If you don't like ghost stories, don't stay around. Like, at this point, I'm going to call you an idiot. If that's what you choose to do in my comments. That might seem like a lot of, I don't know, bluster or whatever, a lot of explaining, but I just, you guys, I cannot tell you how many times over the years people will ask me to tell them a ghost story and then at the end of it tell me how stupid I am for whatever, because it's clearly some fantastical thing that doesn't make any sense. Like, I saw a 10-foot tall demon and people are like, it's probably the wind. Well, wind doesn't, I mean, have you ever seen demon wind? You know, it's bullshit like that. Like, people will do anything except for say, creepy, fun story. That's all I need. That's all I need. Anyways, I'm stalling because I get a little nervous when I tell ghost stories because they do scare me a lot. I'm gonna give myself the spooks. Okay, no, you have to be brave to tell your own stories. Okay. So, as I said, disclaimer. All of these things did happen to me. I am not making any of the parts up. And I am not embellishing either in order to make it spookier. There are ones that really aren't that spooky that have happened to me. I'm not going to bother telling those because they're not that good of stories. So, what we're going to do is start with a very, very mild one, but one of my favorites. It's not that spooky, but it's one of my favorite stories. Mostly because of Gomez's reaction. So, the apartment that Gomez and I have is haunted. It is very haunted. For being an apartment, it's very haunted. It's a really old building, too. And it's in kind of a spooky area of our city, like where everything is a little run down and a little scary, a little creepy at night. So, our apartment is haunted in that we have a poltergeist. We've had other things. Ooh, the thunder's really picking up. I hope that picks up on the microphone. Wouldn't that be cool? Ooh, built-in atmosphere. Anyways, so we have a poltergeist. We've had other ghostly things happen in the apartment, but the main one that has been sustained for the entire, 10 years now we've lived there? Yeah. We've had this poltergeist the whole time. And usually it's just a pain in the ass. Like, it's not really creepy so much as it is a wild pain in the ass. It does things like it will take your debit card and put it in the weirdest places, and you'll cancel it and order a new one, and then it'll like fall out of a tile in the ceiling of the bathroom, like that kind of thing. And you're like, well, it's not really spooky, but it is very fucking annoying. So, but my favorite thing this poltergeist ever did was I was in the kitchen cooking. I don't remember what I was making at this point, sorry. But I was in the kitchen cooking, and Gomez was out there talking to me, and he had kind of a spooky experience, and I don't remember what it was at this point. And he was telling me about it, so we were kind of discussing the poltergeist that we had. And I had said how much of a pain in the ass it was. And I hoped it would fuck off if it was just going to act like this. And then from behind us, a loaf of bread shot out of the cupboard. Like, it banged the door open, shot out of the cupboard, all the way to the other side of the room, hit the microwave, and fell onto the ground. And I had been chopping something. I remember slamming my knife down, and I said, "This is what I mean. Fuck you, stop it." And Gomez was so freaked out. He was like, "What the fuck? Did you see that? Did you just see that?" Like, he did not believe in ghosts at all. Not even slightly. Before we met and started like living together, and enough things had happened to where he was like, "Okay, I admit that something fucking weird is happening." But he was like, "Oh my God." I was like, "It's just being an asshole. Don't let it bully you." Like, so that's kind of like, I tell this story to sort of get a litmus test for you guys as to how freaked out I usually get at things. Because I think for a lot of people that don't have these experiences, if that had just happened to you, that might be pretty scary, right? Or maybe it wouldn't. I don't fucking know. I don't know your life. But I've seen so many genuinely terrifying things that bread shooting out of a cupboard, nothing for me. Like, it's just throwing a tantrum. Like, I think of my poltergeist sometimes as like a moody teenager, because it often is like that. It does shit like that. And like, I've also had people over the years say like, "Well, why don't you set up cameras in your house to catch the poltergeist activity?" Because I don't fucking care to. I don't care. I'm not trying to prove it to anybody. I know what happens. If you would like to hear the stories about it, I'll tell you. But the kind of people that want me to record everything that happens are not the type of people to believe me anyway. They'll just say, "Oh, that's really convenient. There was probably fishing line attached to the bread and pulled it out of the cup." Like, that's, setting up cameras in my house and giving up that level of my own privacy as to be recorded all the time it's just to prove that we have a poltergeist for what particular reason I don't know is not that important to me. I don't give a fuck. You believe me or don't. Who gives a shit? So that's why I don't do things like that. Like you could have proof of ghosts. You can look up fucking YouTube videos right now of poltergeists, and you're not going to believe them. So what's the point? What's the point of it? So that's why it's that. So that's kind of the baseline of where we're starting. So the next thing I'm going to tell you is my very first ghostly experience. It's not that scary. It really isn't. It's an interesting story. But it is the first thing I remember happening to me that I knew for a fact was paranormal, because there was no Occam's razor for it. There was no explanation for it. So, in my house, I mean, I was very, very young, but currently while I'm recording, I'm in the house I grew up in. In this house, to get to the bathroom, you have to walk through the kitchen. And we had this set of baking dishes, like glass baking dishes, and they were stacked up, like the biggest one on the bottom. Obviously, you guys understand what stacking is. And there was about four or five of them stacked up, largest to smallest. And they were in a cupboard up above the fridge. So way up high. And that cupboard is set back pretty far. So there's like at least half of the fridge underneath it. And I promise the setup is going somewhere. So I was, like 8, 9, something like that. And I got up in the middle of the night to go pee, came downstairs, walked to the kitchen. And like, I always turned all the lights on because I was always like real scared at night. I was one of those kids, like, I needed a nightlight and I had to turn all the lights on my way through. And so I had turned the kitchen light on when I went through. And I walked through it, peed, and then came back out. I mean, however long it takes you to pee, a couple seconds, whatever. When I came back out, I had heard nothing. Middle of the night, dead. Like, everything is quiet. And I came out into the kitchen, and the middle-sized baking dish was just sitting on the middle of the floor. Just sitting there. It hadn't broken. If it had fallen from the ceiling cabinet, number one, how did it get out of that stack without me hearing it clanging around? But next, if it had fallen, I would have heard it and it would have broken, or at least chipped, but it was just sitting there. And I was like, what the fuck? And there was something about it that just scared the bejesus out of me, because I had a very noticeable, oh fuck, I don't have a way to explain this. So something very strange just happened, and I don't know what it is. And I don't know, I mean, to this day, I don't know, I mean, did a ghost do it? What happened there? What would have had to have happened is someone would have had to take the top 2 baking dishes off, pulled that one out, put those back, closed the cupboard, and we couldn't get to that cupboard without a step stool. And the step stool was still, like, you know, folded up in the pantry way. So no one could in the house could have gotten it down. And I would have heard the bathroom is right next to, it's attached to the kitchen. Like, it's right there. Where this thing was about 5 feet away from me at most. And none of my family could have come down. And why would they have done that? That's so strange. To wake up in the middle of the night just to move a baking dish to freak me out. They would have had to have been lying and waiter already had it out. And I left it in the kitchen. I didn't put it back, because I just went tearing ass back upstairs. And the next morning, my mom or my dad, I can't remember which one, had asked me if I knew why there was a baking dish in the kitchen. And I was like, no, I don't know. And like, I didn't tell them, because I really don't know why I didn't. Honestly, looking back, you know, that little kid brain thing where you're not quite sure why you're making the decisions you're making. But I just remember thinking, I don't think I should tell them. I don't think I want to tell them. I was too scared. But that was the very first thing that had happened that I couldn't explain. Because other things had happened. But I was pretty good at telling myself, oh, you're just hearing things. Oh, you're just seeing things. You're tired. I was pretty good at doing that. But that was the very first concrete one where I was like, oh, fuck. I can't lie to myself. Something weird just happened. And so that's about where we're at. That was the very first thing. And that, I think that might have started my love of weird paranormal stuff. I don't know. But now we'll get into some of the really scary things. So, I was working at a movie theater while I was in college. And usually I worked in the cafe. You know, nachos, hot dogs, pretzels, that sort of thing. Soft pretzels, you know, the good ones. That sort of thing. That was my entire job. But if we were slow in the cafe and other departments needed help, we would help out. So one of the things I was asked to do one day while it was slow was go in and clean one of the theaters that had just let out. And so I got my broom and my dustpan, and I walked over, and for those of you who haven't worked in movie theaters, and honestly, I don't know if all movie theaters are the same, so if you haven't worked in my movie theater, we had, like, the key to turn the lights on after everyone had left, and what we were supposed to do is we were supposed to wait until everyone had exited the theater, or the credits were totally done, and then turn the lights on. And I'm a very anxious person. I don't have a very confrontational personality, and I'm honestly very scared of talking to people. So there was one guy still in this theater, and I was like, oh God, I'm gonna have to ask him to leave. I don't want to do this. But the credits weren't like still going. It was just a gray screen. Like it was over. And there was just the one guy, and he was almost in the very back, but like, 3 rows from the back, but pretty far down. But he was sitting in the aisle. And not like in the aisle, but he was on the aisle seat, you know what I mean? And so I was kind of like peeking around the corner of where you go in, like looking up at him like, please get up and leave. Please get up. Fuck, he's not leaving. Fuck. Oh, okay. God damn it. And like after a while I was like, okay, you have to say something. You have to say something. You have to clean this fucking theater. But we weren't allowed to turn the lights on unless all the guests were gone. Something about the magic of the darkened movie theater, whatever the fuck. We weren't allowed to turn the bright lights on that we used to clean. And so I had to get him out before I could fucking clean this thing. And I was like, I worked up all of my courage and, had my broom and dustpan in my hand. And I was like, fuck, all right. And so I went around the corner and started walking up the stairs. Because it was one of the bigger theaters. He was pretty far away from me. And I could see him kind of, it's dark in a movie theater. So I could kind of make out what he looked like. Enough to know that it was a man. And he wasn't old. He was like, I don't know, between 25 and 50. It's hard to see in the dark. And he had a hat on, kind of like what are those called? Not a fedora. Like a trilby, that's what they're called. He had like a black, like kind of trilby looking hat on. And a blue button up, blue plaid. And a coat, a dark coat. I don't know if it was leather or what. And what looked like khakis. Because one of his legs was sort of like out into the aisle, He had like his like legs spread a little bit. And I'll be honest, I was a little worried that it was a masturbator, because you get those in movie theaters sometimes, like, it does happen. The amount of used condoms I have cleaned up after in theaters is alarming. So you get people like that. And so, like, I was like, man, I hope this dude's not fucking masturbating in my theater. And so I started walking up the steps. And I was like, excuse me, sir? I need to clean the theater. We asked that guests exit the theater now. It needs to be cleaned, and we need to reset it for the next, the whole spiel. Started doing that. And he did not acknowledge me. He was still staring at the screen. He hadn't looked over. And I thought maybe he couldn't hear me? I don't know what kind of idiocy possessed me. But I kept walking up the stairs, getting closer. And he was still staring at the screen, unmoving. He wasn't... I was pretty sure he wasn't masturbating at this point because his arms weren't moving. So I was like, well, that's, thank goodness for small favors. But he is just stock still. And I started to get creeped out because he wasn't acknowledging my presence at all. And I even had a morbid moment of, did he have like a heart attack? And he's just sitting there dead with his eyes open? What the fuck am I gonna do if this man's fucking dead? And it's like, fuck. Well, now I have to figure out whether he's dead or not. So I have to keep going up. And so I kept walking up the stairs slowly. Because now I'm genuinely nervous. I'm scared. And he's still just staring. And I see his mouth open as I'm going up the steps still. And I had this moment of, oh, thank God he's not dead. But then the dread kind of sunk in. Because if he's not dead, why isn't he acknowledging me? What do I do? The fuck do I do? And even though I was worried now about what he's possibly doing in here, I just kept walking up the stairs. And I got up to just maybe 2 or 3 rows below him. And I was still this whole time going, "Sir, excuse me, sir, I need you to leave." I still kept saying that. And I got pretty close. And he looked down at me. And he looked at me and opened his mouth even farther, like he was screaming. And I stopped. And we just stared at each other, and his mouth just kept getting wider to the point where inevitably I realized that if he was human, his head would have ripped in half by now. And it just kept getting wider. And I started screaming. But I couldn't seem to get my legs to work because I wanted to run away. And he stood up suddenly, faster than I've seen a human move. He stood up. It was like he had wormholed into a standing position. And he started coming out into the aisle. And I kept screaming, and I tried to back down the stairs because there was a part of me that thought, you shouldn't turn your back on him. So I tried to back down the stairs, but I tripped around my broom and dustpan and fell. And I panicked as I was falling, not about falling, but because I had lost sight of him for a second. And when I managed to right myself, to stop myself falling and look up, he was gone. And there was only one way out of that theater, and I was standing in it. And there's no way he could have gotten down all of those stairs without me seeing him leave. And he was just gone. And I panicked. I just panicked. I left my broom and my dustpan and I ran. I was screaming. I managed to get a hold of myself by the time I got out into the hallway outside of the theater, But I was shaking and sweating, and my heart was going so fast. I was terrified. And we had walkie-talkies that we used to communicate with everyone. And I called for someone to come clean that theater with me. I was just terrified. I didn't want to be alone. And I didn't know what to say at that point. When the person got there, one of my friends that I worked with, in the long shot you ever listened to this, Dan, shout out for saving me. But my friend Dan showed up and he was like, "Is it especially dirty? Why do you need help?" And I told him that I had seen a ghost. And that theater it had a lot of weird shit happen in it. Like, we had a phone system, that you would see which extension was calling you on it. It would ring in through there. And when it was, just a skeleton closing crew, and you would know where the 3 people in the whole thing were, because they were honestly usually hanging out all together down in the concession, the phone would ring, and it would be one of the upstairs offices calling down, and we knew no one was there. It had a lot of really weird stuff happen in it. So when I told Dan I saw a ghost, he didn't think I was crazy. What I was not expecting was for him to say, "Oh, the guy in the hat, in the coat, yeah, he's in there sometimes." I never went in that theater again. Never. I still, to this day, I refuse. I'm not going back in there. I will not go see that guy. I asked around, though, to see who else had seen the Hat Man of Theater 17. And the interesting thing is that no one else ever saw his mouth do that thing. And he never stood up for anyone else. They would just see him sitting there. And when they turned the lights on, he would vanish. No one had ever approached him in the dark. They had just turned the lights on because they don't really care. They have shit to do. And once the lights are on, he'll fucking leave. I'm the only one who ever left the lights off like we were supposed to. I also didn't know there was a ghost in that theater, so thanks for the warning, idiots. So there's that. Now, let me see. Ooh, I'll tell this one. This one's creepy. Back to my apartment. One of the non-poltergeist ghosts that we had for a little bit. And if you've ever had a house ghost, you might know that sometimes they're transient. Sometimes they just show up for a little while, and then you never see them again. And this was one of those. So at the time, Gomez and I had a roommate, which we do now too, but it was a different roommate. And so as to not give his identity away, let's call him Kyle. Okay, so Kyle was living with us. And Kyle had waist length blonde hair and a big full beard as well. He looked like a real Viking. But he had really long, very pale blonde hair. And so that's what you need to know about this. So one night, I was going to the bathroom, which a lot of my stories end up with me going to the bathroom in the middle of the night. I get up to pee a lot. But I had gotten up to pee. And I was walking through the dining room. And off to the left, out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone standing in the dark in the corner of the dining room, over by my bookshelf. Like, Gomez has a bookshelf. There's a bookshelf for the roommates. I have a bookshelf. Mine's in the corner. And he was standing in front of my bookshelf. And Kyle often borrowed my books. They are, anyone's allowed. It's a free Tisch library. As long as you like Chuck Palahniuk books and Charles Bukowski books, you can borrow any of my books. So, and I thought it was a little bit strange that he was standing in front of my bookshelf at 4 o'clock in the morning, in the dark, picking out a book, but it was whatever. I was tired and I was just want to go to the bathroom. I didn't really think about it. And also, I didn't say like, hey, Kyle, or anything. Like, I'm just not a sociable person, especially if I've just woken up. But I saw him in the corner and I was like, whatever, man. And I walked off to the bathroom. And the way our bathroom is the way our apartment is set up is it goes the dining room and then the kitchen and then the bathroom, all in a line with no doors or anything coming off the side. Our apartment's like one long hallway, kind of. And so the mirror in the bathroom, if you're standing at it, it's right in front of the doorway, and you can see all the way into the dining room from it. And as I walked into the bathroom, like, I had looked up and I could still see him in the mirror at the bookshelf, and I saw his long blonde hair. I didn't think much of it. Peed, whatever. And as I was like leaving the bathroom, I saw him still there, but he was still just standing there. He wasn't moving. And so from the bathroom, I kind of watched him for a second because I was like, what is he doing? Is he sleepwalking? He's still just, he hadn't moved. And he had just been standing there, arms down at his sides this whole time. And I was like, that's a very strange thing. What is he doing? And so I just watched him for like a couple seconds. And then he turned and walked off. But the weird thing is that he turned towards the wall that was right beside him and went through the wall, which Kyle didn't do a lot. He wasn't known to phase through walls. And I had a real moment of, oh, shit. Oh, shit. Oh, fuck. Oh, shit. Okay. And I had to walk through that room to get back to my bedroom. And yes, I did turn all of the lights on the way through, and quite frankly, I ran. But that's not the last time we saw the ghost of our roommate, who was very much alive. And I wasn't the only one who saw it. Gomez saw it in the same place, in the corner in front of my bookshelf. And he was in almost the exact same position and almost in the exact same way that I saw it. He got up to pee, saw Kyle in the corner, and kept walking. And when he came back, Kyle was gone. And he was like, that's weird. And he mentioned it to me offhandedly. He was like, do you see Kyle the other night just standing? And I was like, what? What night? And we worked out that it was a different night that I had seen it. And we were like, what the fuck is going on? Why is he doing that? And I was like, well, when you saw him, did he walk through the wall? And Gomez was like, well, obviously not, because people can't do that. And I was like, okay, when I saw him, that's what was happening. And so we kind of put together that we had obviously a ghost. We could not figure out why it looked like Kyle, though. It was super weird, right? So one night I was already in the bathroom, but I was standing at the mirror. I had the door open, and I was standing at the mirror fixing my hair. And as I looked up, I saw Kyle in the same spot in front of the bookshelf, standing there again. But this time he was facing me. Every other time it had always been his back. And it was not Kyle's face. It did not have eyes. Jesus Christ. So, I'm sorry, it freaks me out. This story freaks me the fuck out. I got chills and goosebumps and shit. Fuck. He didn't have any eyes. Which is bad enough, but he started walking towards the bathroom. And I screamed and shut the door. But I was the only one home. Which, when I first saw him standing there, hadn't really registered. Like, what is Kyle doing here? He's not home. But he just started walking towards me. And I shut the door. And, fuck, I could hear, like, heavy footfalls come all the way up to the door. And then I could hear knocking. Just light tapping, like. But it wasn't rhythmic. And it didn't stop. It wasn't like knock, 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 stop. It just kept going. And I didn't know what to do. I just stood there with my hand over my mouth so I didn't scream anymore. Panicking. Because what am I going to do? There's no one home. There's no one else home. No one can. What do I do? And then eventually the knocking stopped. And I waited. And waited. Probably about 15 minutes. And I didn't hear it walk away. But I didn't hear anything else. And I couldn't stay in the bathroom all night. So I opened the door and there's nothing there. I don't know what happened. And after that, we kept catching glimpses of it But it never came up and knocked on the door again. It never turned around again. But even Kyle saw it. He saw himself from the back, standing in that corner. No one else ever saw its face but me. And then just eventually it stopped happening. And then a long while later, Kyle moved out. So that's that story. Let me see. Okay, I'll tell another one. This one is very, very scary. But at the same time, this is one of those ones that's a lot harder to believe. So if you haven't been able to believe me up until this point, you're going to want to shut it off now. But for those of you still listening, there's a little bit of a trigger warning for the death of a child. Historical. A child doesn't die in the story. But I did see a child ghost, and it's pretty graphic. So if that's gonna bother you, I would say click off now. So, there was a cemetery that me and my friends used to go to when I was around 18, 19, 20 in there. And we had found it one day, sort of accidentally, driving around in the woods. Because I live in a very rural place. It's mostly farmland and backwoods and national forest. And we used to like to just drive around. And we would play a game that we called Left, Right, Straight. And if any non-rural kids are listening to this and you don't know what that is, it's where you drive. And every time you come to an intersection, whoever's in the car, if it's your turn, you can pick left, right, or straight. And, each time it's a new person's turn and you end up where you end up. And so we had been playing Left, Right, Straight for hours at this point, and we were deep in the woods. Still on logging roads. But on logging roads. And we saw this little break in the trees. And we wanted to stretch our legs, so we thought we would go see where this path led. It was too small for my friend's truck. She had a very small truck. We were all crammed in the one bucket seat. There wasn't a back seat or anything, and we had one kid in the trunk bed of it. But it was too small for even her little truck. And what we found when we progressed up this path, about, I would say, half a mile into the woods, we found a break in the trees up this path. And there was this little cemetery up there. And the most recent tombstone we could find, it was a very, very small cemetery. I mean, maybe 12 graves at most. Very, very, very small. And at first we thought maybe it was like one of those like family graveyards, essentially, that people used to have. But there's no houses around there for miles. And all the people on the headstones had different last names other than like when they were grouped up together, like a husband, wife, and a child. But, there wasn't a common last name between all of them. But there was this giant white cross in the middle that was old. I mean, it was made of like white stone, like white marble. But it was obviously very, very old. And the latest grave, was someone who had died in 1893. So it was an old graveyard. It was very overgrown. And it was nighttime. We had flashlights and stuff. Because we like to do this sort of shit. Like, we often would just stop and truck up through the woods. And so we had flashlights, and that's how we had inevitably found it. And we had driven back very carefully out, writing down the steps that we took to leave so that we knew how to get there again. And so we would often go up to this gravesite at night when we were feeling creepy, or in the daytime to sort of take care of the headstones, because it was just we started to feel very attached to it, I guess is the best way to put it. It felt like we were the only people who knew it existed. It was out in the middle of nowhere. Who else would remember that this thing even existed? And the amount of overgrowth very clearly showed that no one was taking care of it. So we decided that we were going to. So we spent a lot of time there. And it didn't have a name, So we called it Sleepy Hollow. Because why not? And we had a lot of very scary things happen there, which is why we kept going back. We would go ghost hunting. We enjoyed it. And I became personally very invested in cleaning up and clearing this one set of graves of this husband and wife and their 6-year-old son, whose name was Leo, according to his tombstone. And I became very attached to Leo, which, for the very sharp-eyed among you who have listened to all of my stories, would know, maybe, why I was unhealthily attached to this grave of a little boy in the summer of me being 19. But that story isn't for this. But I felt very connected to this little family. And Leo had died in 1876, I believe. Yeah. No, 1886, sorry. And his father had died the same day as him. But his mother lived for another, I think, 10 years, something like that. No. 2 years. Just a couple more years. Sorry, guys. It's been 18 fucking years since I've seen these headstones. It's been a while. I remember his mother had lived a long time. Or what felt like a long time when I was a teenager. So. I used to bring Leo presents, and I would put them on the grave. Flowers, and then I decided that, little 6-year-old boys probably don't want flowers. They probably want toys. And so before I went up, I would stop at the little grocery store on the way out of town. And out of one of the little gashapon machines, I would get a bouncy ball, like a little super ball. And I started bringing him bouncy balls. And he had quite a little collection by the time I stopped going. But the night I left the very first bouncy ball ended up being quite scary. While we were there, nothing happened. We just sat around for a while, trying to spook each other out, and didn't see anything, so eventually we packed up and left. Got home, I went to bed. Maybe around 3 o'clock in the morning, something like that. And something woke me up. Not too long after I had fallen asleep. Something woke me up. And I couldn't tell what had woken me because I didn't hear anything when I woke up or anything like that. And I had this little bedside light. It was in the shape of a princess castle, and when you clicked it, the castle lit up. It was a little nightlight. My boyfriend at the time had gotten me because I was afraid of the dark. Still am. And so I clicked on my nightlight and sat up in bed and looked around. I didn't see anything. And then from behind me, I heard "Mama" in this little boy voice. And I jumped when I heard it. And I turned around really quick, and there was a little boy there behind my bed, looking through the slats in my headboard. And I could see his nose and one of his eyes. And that was about it. And I didn't know what to do. I just froze. And he moved over slightly, and I could see a little bit of his mouth. And he said it again. He said, "Mama?" And I didn't know what to do. I was just frozen. And then this part of me suddenly realized that I think it's Leo. And so I said, "Leo?" And he smiled. And he said, "Mama?" And he came around the side of the bed. And he was adorable. He had blonde hair and these big blue eyes. And he had this these dirty clothes on. But very clearly, late 1800s, the little boy shorts, and he was barefoot, and he was the cutest fucking thing. And I wasn't afraid all of a sudden. I felt like I knew him. I had been tending his grave for a while, and I was very emotional about it. But it was genuinely the first time in my life where I had ever seen an apparition. I had seen shadows, I had seen white shapes moving through the woods, those sort of things, but I had never seen just a full body person standing there. He didn't look like a ghost. He wasn't translucent or anything like that. He just looked like a little 6-year-old boy. And I said, "Hi, what are you doing here?" And he said, "Mama?" And I was like, "Yes, Leo. Well, no, I'm not your mom." And when I said that, his eyes got kind of big. And I don't mean paranormally big. I mean his eyes widened. And then he started screaming, and all of a sudden, a half of his head was missing. And there was blood everywhere. And it looked like someone had shot him in the head. And I could see blood going everywhere, and I started screaming. And he was still screaming. And my mom woke up from the screaming and burst into my room, and as she opened the door, he disappeared. And I was still screaming and screaming and screaming, and I had a lot of trauma at that point in my life. Again, if you have listened to the Tito video, you know. And so me having screaming nightmares wasn't that strange. And I was like, my mom was like, what? And I was like, I saw a little boy. And her opinion at the time was that I had been having a bad dream. And I felt like it had been too real for that. I had sat up. I had turned the light on, my nightlight, but my nightlight was still on. I hadn't gone to bed with it on. So I must have turned it on at some point, but I managed to convince myself that I was sleepwalking. In essence, even though I wasn't, moving, but you know what I mean, like a hypnagogic state. I had been having a waking nightmare. And I managed to calm down enough that I went back to sleep, believing it had just been a nightmare. But that wasn't the last time I saw Leo. I saw him enough to know that if he had his whole head, he would call me Mama, and he thought I was his mother. I saw him waking up from sleep in the middle of the night. I saw him, I had, totally awake. I hadn't gone to sleep at all, just sitting there watching TV. He would come into the room. But it was always after I visited his grave. It was like I would visit his grave, even during the daytime. I would visit his grave, and then at night, he would follow me home or something, and I would see him. And through trial and error, I realized that telling him that I was not his mother, or doing anything that made him realize that I was not his mother, would scare him, and his head would do the same thing. It would cave in. He would start screaming. And eventually he would disappear. But if I kept up the pretense that I was his mother, he was just a little boy. And so I asked him where he had lived. I asked him questions like that. And unfortunately, he gave 6-year-old answers. I would say, "Where do we live?" And he would say, "At our house with Daddy." And I would say, "What's Daddy's name?" Because I knew his name from the tombstone. But I wanted to see how much he was cognizant of what's going on. And he would say his name is Daddy. I would say, "What year is it?" And he would say I was being silly. I knew what year it was. And he would give different answers, depending. It was 1885, 1884, or whatever. He didn't really give anything before that. I don't think he had memory before that. He would have been 3 or 4. He wouldn't have been super aware of the year. But he knew the last couple years of his life. And he would give a year. And I would ask him what he does, What do we do all day? And that's how I figured out they had a farm. And that Leo really liked sheep. They didn't have sheep. The neighbors had sheep. He really liked sheep. They had cows, and cows were kind of scary. But he was going to be expected to milk them when he got a little bigger. And he wasn't sure he wanted to do that because they seemed very scary. And we had a few conversations like that. A lot of the time he would be slightly confused, just in general. And sometimes he would figure out on his own that I wasn't his mother. I don't think I probably didn't look like her. But sometimes he would realize that. And he would say, "Mommy, why is your hair different?" And then his head would cave in. He would scream and he would disappear. It got to the point where I would dread that happening. And I had to figure out a way to lay him to rest. It was very hard in a way. It was almost like giving up your child in a way. But I couldn't watch him go through this, and it was terrifying for me. Not only because of that, but he was a ghost. Like, that's some of the scariest shit. And no one else could see him but me. There were times where he would show up, and the friends that I would be ghost hunting with or whatever, or my friends would be over. They knew about him. I had told them. But they couldn't see him. They could see shadows of him. They would say, "Is he over there?" Because I can see like a shadow, like a kid-sized shadow. But I was the only one who could see him, flesh and blood see him, and I don't know why. I don't really believe in anything like that, you know? Like, I don't know why I could see him and no one else could. But they knew when he was around, and they could hear him a little bit. They could accurately say what he was saying if they listened really hard. Sort of like when you hear an EVP and it's a little garbled. And he was never aware of them. It was like he couldn't see them either. I don't know why. I don't understand how things like that work. And just to be honest with you guys, never believe anyone who says that they know how those things work, because there's no fucking way they do. I don't know. I don't know, dude. But the first thing I did was go to the library and look up some records for Leo and his parents. And I found records of the dad and Leo's death. And his father had shot Leo and then shot himself. I don't know why. Obviously, no one does. But the mother died of natural causes a few years later. So I don't know what happened there. I don't know if it was an accident and then he killed himself because he couldn't live with it. I don't know. But that's what was reported. And so I started looking up how to figure out how to lay things to rest. Spirits, that sort of thing. And I tried a couple of things, because religions are all different. New agey people are all different. I tried a lot of different things. I tried burning sage. I tried a mirror box. I got holy water from the Catholic church my mother goes to. Tried that. Last rites, that sort of thing. But eventually, the thing that worked was talking to him about his real mother and not letting him feed into the delusion that I was his mother. When he would come around, he would say, "Mama," and I would say, "Leo, I'm not your mother. Tell me about your mother." And we got a little farther each time. And the last time I ever saw him, he asked me, finally, "Am I dead?" And I said, "Yes. And it's time to move on." And he did. He just disappeared. And I never saw him again. I still went up and tended to his grave for many years after. I haven't been back in a while. Life got in the way. But I tended his grave. Not his father's, but I tended Leo's and his mother's for many years after. So, It's a bit sentimental, I guess. One's a bit sad instead of scary. Or maybe you found it scary. I don't really know. I always found it a bit sad. But this is about an hour long, so I'll leave it here. I hope you enjoyed my hour of ghost stories. I have many other stories to tell. We went to that graveyard a lot. And a lot of other graveyards that we found over the years. We were very dedicated ghost hunters for a while. And we saw a lot of shit. I saw a lot of shit, I should say. Some of them everyone saw, but... And my apartment hasn't stopped being haunted since, which... My apartment being haunted does make a little bit more sense now, doesn't it? That maybe things followed me home a couple of times. Yeah, I have a lot more ghost stories, so there will be another episode of Tish's Ghost Stories. And if you don't believe in ghosts, let's say I'm cutting it here so I have time to go write more. How about that? Does that make you feel better? I love you all, and I'll see you next time.